When
I
you
might
say
like it.
textual healing,
You're going to do a dance?
yeah.
The obscenity of the gestures, I simply cannot. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I am joined this evening. I am in Tbilisi, Georgia. Dr. Paul Taylor is in North Wales. And we are going to be talking about the importance of literature for guiding the mind and healing the soul in a series that is going to be called Textual Healing. Dr. Paul Taylor, thank you very much for joining me, sir.
Thank you.
Why is it like important and that we read books and not just scroll on the phone?
You've completely uneloquently, if that's a word, so I'm already contradicting my own scorn. You've identified why it rots our brains, it turns us into Neanderthals. But to be serious for a second, I think we've been corresponding about this for a while. And I think you sent me an interesting, was it an Instagram of the female Scottish neuroscientist who was talking about
Yeah.
people using Chat GBT for therapy. And I found
Yes.
that very. Can you remember her name?
I can't. I'd have to go back through our emails, but I can post a
Yeah.
comment afterwards and
Yeah.
add
Well, no,
it.
it's just I think she's become relatively quite famous. Like I say, she's Scottish, relatively young scientist, and she was mentioning that people using ChatGPT for some type of self-therapy is a really bad idea from her professional point of view, because it only gives back to them what they themselves are saying or asking. It's like a mirrored reflection. So that's an immediate reason I'd argue why literature is important, because literature takes you to a foreign place. It takes you somewhere outside of yourself, yet at the same time, it's a weird interior act. So it builds interiority. It takes you into your own head, but it takes you into your own head under conditions of different environment. If you're reading a historical novel, for example, a completely different realm of thought where people acted differently, spoke differently. So it's this very strange thing, but whatever it is, it's not a mirror. It can act as a mirror in the sense that it makes you think about yourself. It makes you look at yourself differently, but it doesn't just passively reflect back to you what you give it. A good novel will, I think it's maybe the difference. A good novel will change you, and it's the difference. I once read somewhere years ago in American motels, they had vibrating beds. So you'd put a nickel in and the bed would shake, and people found that very stimulating and exciting. But my argument would be, once you've finished the massage on the bed, you are no different as a person. You might be slightly more relaxed than you were before you started. You haven't changed as a person. You read like one of your favorite novels, Blood Meridian. You are not the same person after reading that you were before you read it. So
No,
that's
you
another
cannot be.
example. Yeah, that's another example of why it's important. So the long-winded answer was it builds interiority, but in a healthy, non-narcissistic way, if that makes sense.
I'm wondering if actually you sent it to me. There's an article by Ashley Frawley that you sent to me about the dangers of people turning to ChatGPT for their mental health.
Yeah, I think.
And then there's an Instagram as well that I'll dig out. I can't see it right now. Where yes, there was a lady saying, "Don't use ChatGPT as a therapist. Read literature. Read literature." And it's interesting that I came across. I think we've been talking for around 3 years. It feels like longer.
Is that an
But
insult?
around 3 years ago, I do remember you saying to me that something to the effect of, that we live in a post-literate culture, and that was a big problem. And I really couldn't wrap my head around it. And 3 years later, I'm thinking, God, yes, what an advantage you have if you have read books and do read books
Can I
over
give
other
you, before I
people.
forget, because I'm senile basically, but there are two major studies. One, I think it's called the British Survey. Is it the British Survey Attitudes? The British Attitude Survey or something. It's the single biggest survey of social attitudes, I think, in the world. It's been going on for decades. And you saw an article about this, didn't you? And I was already aware of it because I'd seen it independently. But the gist of it was the single biggest social science study in the world has suggested that one of the biggest single indicators of lifelong success and mental well-being is just the simple act of reading. So that's one thing. And then much more recently, it's the University of Florida and University College London. I've just released it's in the journal iScience, I think. They've just done a study over the last 20 years in America, again, a very large study that suggested that there has been a marked, rapid decline in the amount of people who read for pleasure. And this would go to your very initial point about what does scrolling do to our minds. I can't help but make the correlation. Never have so many kids been endlessly scrolling, and never have so many kids read so little.
Yeah, which is, I was thinking about this on my walk just now. When I was a kid and I was growing up, I was obsessed with reading. And by today's standards, I would have been pretty nerdy, but I was using it as a tool of dissociation a lot of times. So it's not that dissociation from day-to-day quotidian reality.
See, that's proof you've been reading.
Indeed, from the pedestrian.
Well, what?
It's not. Yeah, what? Why are you using long words, lad? It's not that in and of itself it's a bad thing. It's I suppose maybe I'm building a point slowly in a very roundabout way in conversations with you and with Ed as well. I'm bothered by how much technology does for you. And that's the problem. It's not dissociation. Of course, there's nothing implicitly wrong with dissociation, but when I use the phone, it does nearly everything for me. And surely the next step will be, it will be even more invasive and it will do even more for me. Whereas when you read, you're forced into a middle ground with the author. Like, I have to, obviously they've put in a huge amount of work, but I'm doing at least half the work to build the world, because the words are just, scribbles, symbols on a piece of paper. I then have to conjure it up, and every single individual reader is conjuring up a slightly different version of that story. And there's work there. There's exercise there. There's that. I think that's
another thing. Sorry, I've noticed there's a question by Yared Lopez, which I'll get to in a second. So I just didn't want them to think I was ignoring them. One of the other things to add to what you've just said about the work you do to add, there's also little things like, look, people can see behind my head. I basically live in a part of the house is a library. But there's an issue about I have a very haphazard filing system, which in itself, by the way, at some point maybe we could talk about, because I routinely find, if anyone asks me, how do you pick the themes for your videos? I have piles of books lying around, and I'll pick a book, and that leads me eventually to another book in a different pile. And I'm convinced my subconscious sometimes leads me to certain books. So it seems like it's a random picking up. I honestly don't believe that. But on a more serious note, when I was researching for various degrees at Edinburgh, there was the fourth floor was my favorite. I've spoken about this in one of my videos. It was this dark, maternal, womb-like psychotherapeutic space, especially on a dark, rain-lashed evening, which was basically Edinburgh in August. But one of the things, if I found a book I needed, because of the way libraries are organized, I would see 3 or 4 books next to it on the same theme. And I would go, haha, and I'd look at those. And before you know it, I've been in that library 4 hours and I've read 4 books that I wasn't expecting to read. That doesn't work on your filthy Kindle. Your Kindle may recommend books to you, but then we're into the algorithm and we're into all of that. It hasn't been selected by a human brain saying these books are thematically linked. So it's the serendipity of thematic relevance, if that's not a contradiction in terms. When you go into an old-fashioned library, gave you access to serendipitous encounters with mental activity, as well as
Yes.
the exercise you're talking about.
Yes. The Kindle is filthy. The phone is filthy. There's a very here in Tbilisi, there's kind of a hipstery vibe to the place. And one of my fantasies today, as I was walking around and I'm doing work, I'm talking to family, I'm organizing different bits and pieces. It's all through the phone. What would my life look like if I just had The Birth of Tragedy in paperback form and a notebook with a pencil? And what would my brain look like? And I already know the answer to the question because I've done social media fasts before. And when you're bored and you can't access social media, you just read. My brain, I get smarter. I am fucking dumber for using the phone all the time. And there's so much waste because if you struggle with something like you got me to, I'm still wading through Birth of Tragedy. But as you're wading through, trying to struggle to comprehend fresh ideas in other areas of your life come up, you just start thinking more clearly. You just start seeing things. Your brain can start to see things through. Whereas if I'm scrolling all the time, I think my thoughts last about 2 or 3 seconds each, and they're made of Play-Doh, and they just crumble. They just crumble. They're really crap thoughts, like duh, 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 duh.
One of the
So yeah,
truly
there is.
Yeah, one of the truly scary things is you well know, and you periodically lambaste me for it. I've never owned a
Mm,
smartphone. I've refused, like
mm,
some troglodyte Luddite from centuries gone by. But I'm
mm,
parasitical because I rely. Well, I'm parasitical on my wife for lots of things, but I have to have her mobile phone number to basically
mm.
participate in huge aspects of life. It's
Yeah.
incredibly difficult to order anything online without a mobile phone number. So I
Yes.
genuinely sympathize with people who have them, but I've always, maybe it's because I did a PhD about computer hackers back in the 1989, I think I began it. So, maybe I've been lucky, and maybe it's just this misanthropic personality I have, that the last thing on earth I wanna do is communicate with more people.
Yeah.
But I've always thought it odd, why would people want to be bombarded with messages all the time? I struggle with
Because they're
emails.
lonely. Because they're lonely. They're
But
lonely. They're deeply, deeply lonely.
it's a serious question, though. Do you think, because I'm now seeking your professional therapeutic opinion, but it's not a narcissistic question, but I'm interested in how odd am I that I never ever wanted one. Maybe it's because professionally I could see down the road the harm it might create because I was lucky enough to be
I mean,
studying around the area.
you might just have a very clear vision. Like we asked this question in the fitness and the strength training world. Why do people stick to really hard programs? Why do they stick to really hard diets? It's usually because the answer that you're going to get if you do a meta-analysis of all the papers, they have a very, very strong vision of the danger and they have a very, very strong vision of the gain. So here's the loss, here's the gain. And it could be that you just have a very clear view of how dangerous it is, far clearer than somebody like me does. It's an
That's
emergent thing.
That's actually very
Yeah.
helpful because it chimes with two other weird aspects of my life. One is I've never learned to drive. And one of the
Mm,
reasons is I had a very clear mental image of me hitting someone with a monkey wrench because they cut me off. You know what my temper, it would be me behind a wheel would be ridiculous. So I've never learned to drive. And again,
yeah.
that's caused inconvenience in my life. But I just think if more people had the self-awareness to realize, you're a borderline nut job, you should not be behind the wheel of a car, the world might be a better place. And the other thing I can think of along those lines is I've never gambled because I
Yeah.
absolutely know if I started, I would be bankrupt within a week. That
Yeah.
it goes to your point about this clear vision that strikes me as such an obvious thing. Why would I go down
Yes.
that route?
Yes, and I think that's the answer. Is you just have a very, very clear sense that it's rotting, that it could potentially hack you were into hacking. It hacks your consciousness. That sounds a bit woo, but I mean it in a very literal sense. We know this from the studies. It breaks up your consciousness. It breaks down the capacity to concentrate, and it's quite deliberate. And effectively, it gives everybody a sort of technologically induced ADHD, because it's just better for the apps. It's just better for the platforms. They make more money if you're consuming more content, and you'll consume more content if you're greedy for the content.
So I can go to Yared's question, because I'm likely,
Yeah.
like I said, senility will make me forget. But Yared is, forgive me, that's a male name, is it? He or she? I'm assuming that's a male name.
Jared is a male.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't get many Jareds in Liverpool, so that's, excuse my ignorance.
No, we don't get Jareds in Liverpool.
Earlier on, he asked about, do mentally stable people need to read less fiction? I think the question was. And that's an interesting question, because that raises, without trying to be elusive deliberately, that raises the question of what is mental stability. So I can think of, for example, mental stability that is bovine, cattle-like, sheep-like, ovine, where you just follow the crowd and you're mentally incredibly stable. I think it's a vexed question, because if you think of the number of authors or great artists who've been on the edge mentally, my way of looking at it is I read an awful lot of fiction. I like to think myself as mentally stable, or to repeat what I said earlier, I'm mentally stable enough to know how unstable I am in certain situations, and I avoid them. I'd argue that's a form of mental stability, being aware of your weaknesses. But I think I read people on the edge and the fiction they produce or the philosophy they produce, and I find that incredibly cathartic. So just recently, I've done a video where I've been mentioning Schopenhauer, and I've had a bit, not a kickback, but a couple of people have been quite scathing. Most people seem to. One person very nicely said that I've never read him because I was always put off, because people like Nietzsche, initially I think Nietzsche was in love with Schopenhauer's work and then fell out with him or his work. But I've always just found it hilariously bad-tempered. And again, I think that goes to when people read, whether it's fiction or philosophy, I think one thing that's incredibly important is coming to it with an open mind is the wrong phrase. I'm trying to express, I think it's coming to it with a highly developed sense of nuance and sarcasm and tongue-in-cheekness, if that's a phrase. So on another occasion, you and I chatted about, because we're pretentious gits, Plato's Republic. And I am convinced the vast majority of people, and this sounds incredibly pompous from me that I know better, but I read Plato and I read and hear irony and sarcasm and playfulness. And there was a guy called Popper, this like really po-faced philosopher, who basically accused Plato of being a fascist because his ideal republic involved draconian laws and an authoritarian bent of mind. Whereas I think I said to you, I'm convinced Plato was writing this as a warning of where these thoughts can lead. And guess what? Plato also pilloried, made fun of poetry, and yet his book is full of dramatic techniques. The dialogues of Socrates, it's dramatic dialogue. And Socrates always loads the conversation, or Plato's recording of the conversations are always so biased towards Socrates that it's funny. And I just think so many, and maybe again, you can psychoanalyze me and say, I've got this preternatural desire to find everything funny, which I sometimes think I do. But I do think when you come to fiction and philosophy, it's not a bad fault to have. I don't know what you think.
It's really interesting, because I developed a theory that you just ruined, that social media usage, and I was quite attached to it as well. Social media usage was making people less able to detect irony, and it was making people interpret things in a very literal way. Like if I start screaming on the Jolly Heretic, I want fascism, and people go, "Oh, Richard Grannon is a fascist." And I'm like, there's no context. Now, I've not read Schopenhauer. and I've not gone that deep into Plato's Republic, but it was one of the first things that struck me about Nietzsche was people seem to read it in this very dry, what he says is what he means way. And I read it as this guy is a contrarian. Even in his 40s, he's kind of got this adolescent rebellion. He even rebels against himself. It's borderline, it cycles. He's up, he's down, he's optimistic, he's pessimistic. It's wonderful, but you've got to see it as like a crazy, he's like the Kanye. He's like the Kanye of philosophy. It's diss tracks. He loves Schopenhauer, then he fucking hates him. He loves the Greek philosophers, then it's no good. And I'm like, well, I'm not that bright. How are other people not seeing this? It's clearly meant to be funny. And I have no question whatsoever in my mind that a lot of what Nietzsche is saying is it's sardonic. And I find it frustrating as I'm reading it because I'm thinking, for fuck's sake, Nietzsche, people won't get this. They're not, it's too sardonic. It's like, just say what you mean, because I feel maybe similar to you do about Schopenhauer. 60% of the time, he's just provoking. He's just provoking you as a reader.
What if another idea? What if, even if Schopenhauer was being serious,
the opposite is true.
The extra point I would make is, even if Schopenhauer meant certain things, I must have missed the memo where you have to read the author exactly the way he or she wanted you to read them. This is the beauty of literature. I can read Schopenhauer against the grain. It may be a self-defensive justification because I'm psychologically disturbed and I find dark things funny. That may be true. But also, for more well-balanced people, shouldn't it be the case that they can read Schopenhauer within limits? Because to say that you should be able to read Schopenhauer in any way, shape, or form takes away some of the substance. I accept that. But I just think literature and philosophy is much, much more flexible than most people realize.
I could still man your position. I think all you're saying is we don't have to stick to the doctrine that we have to stick with the author's intention to the letter at all times. We could read Nietzsche, like aphorisms from Nietzsche, and say, well, he was grumpy when he wrote that, and that we're going to take it, we're going to listen to it, but we're just going to. You can contextualize things, and you have a right to do that without going crazy and saying, "Oh no, this means something that there's no basis for believing that it means." No, I think you're right. I think so. I had the idea that it was a social media effect, that people were getting very, very literal and non-nuanced, and everything is all the dimensions are taken out, and there's like 2 dimensions, and that's it.
I think you're totally right. And I've pointed this out before, and sorry to reiterate, but the fact that people overuse the word literal, that seemed to me, but that coincided with their complete inability to understand what the word means. So people literally say all the time that literally this happened, and it's like, well, just say it happened. You don't need to use the word. My argument, my suggestion, my theory is people have lost the ability to understand what a metaphor is. Therefore, deep within their subconscious, it's become this weird social meme where people need to overuse the word literally.
So understanding a metaphor takes work, and everything that takes work is slowly bleeding out of the culture. So before social media, maybe as a result of consumer capitalism or something, before social media, even in the, I don't know, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, people would read, as you said, Plato's Republic without the possibility of it being funny. There was an example that was tickling my brain, and it was really frustrating me, and now I've just remembered it. I've told you about this before, but I don't think I've mentioned it to the audience before. The Book of Job. I don't think that's serious. I think it's a comedy. I think it's an old Jewish comedy. I think it's clearly an old Jewish comedy, and it probably should be read like theater script, like theater notes. Like the whole premise, Satan flies up to heaven and is like, ha, 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 I'm going to pull God's beard and tease God and provoke God to do something to prove a point to Satan. That's funny. And then the horrible things that happen to Job is not an example of saying this is how God punishes the righteous. It's it's just a tragic comedy about how awful life can be, even if you're very faithful, even if you're very, very righteous, with a moral core at the end of it. But I think we should allow for the possibility that parts of the Bible, or some of the books of the many books of the Bible written in thousands of years apart in different languages, might have had a comical intent. I think we should be open to that.
Oh, well, beyond comical. So I've mentioned him before to you, but to viewers, Harold Bloom was an American Jewish, one of the most well-read people. I think he died in the early 2000s. And I think his first language, it's weird because he's one of the best read, very incredibly articulate, but he always had a very, very slight accent. And I think it's because Yiddish was his first language and he didn't learn English till about 3.5, 4, I think I remember reading. But he has a whole theory about, and it's not just him, there's a huge load of scholarship about the various books of the Old Testament and who wrote them. So there's the Yarist, I've forgotten the name, the J author. There's all these names for the hypothetical authors, and he argues that parts of the Old Testament were written by a Hittite slave in the court of King Solomon, and there's all these weird theories. But to your point, there are many layers, different authorial voices. There's comedy, there's tragedy. The Old Testament, and it's why I get so defensive about Judeo-Christian culture against Lipton. I honestly believe it's a massive thing because our whole society, our Western society, was premised upon this idea that there is a book full of nuance that you can read as a religious text. But I would argue till the cows come home that if you're completely irreligious, the Old Testament is still one of the richest humanist tracts you could find. If you want to think that Yahweh is just a beardy man like me on a cloud and it's nonsense, that's absolutely fine. But the beauty and the depth of the Old Testament is truly stunning. And I plan on doing I'm always in this bind. I would love to do some videos on the Old Testament, but it's finding a way to do it that doesn't turn off and alienate everyone thinking you're trying to evangelize. I'm a card-carrying devout agnostic. It's not from a religious point of view, but having said that, there is so much condensed wisdom in the Old Testament, and it's either taught or read or spoken about in such dry, boring ways. So one very quick anecdote. There's a, is it Mark Glauberman? I think he is. He's an American rabbinical scholar. And he talks about when the myth of Noah, when Noah lets the dove out and the dove comes back, I think it's an olive twig or some type of twig. He also let a raven off the boat and the raven never comes back. And no one ever mentions or asks the question, what happened to the raven? And he makes the point that the dove is connected to finding an inhabitable human space. The raven is a wild creature, so it's obviously found somewhere and stayed there. It's got no link to humanity. And he develops off the back of this his theory that the Old Testament is all about when God says to humankind, you have dominion over the world. He's describing how there are various layers of importance in creation. And to say we have dominion over creatures doesn't mean we should be cruel, but there is something unique about humankind. And this was the Bible's way of expressing this. And you can go into so much depth, but I'm guessing that the vast majority of people aren't familiar with that type of interpretation.
Who came up with that idea? What was the guy's name?
I think it's Glauberman, Glouberman, Mark Glauberman from memory. He wrote the books called The Raven and the Dove. But he's got a whole trilogy of books about Old Testament interpretation. And that put me onto stories like the Tower of Babel. Is absolutely fascinating. And I think we looked at it one time on one of your shows, and it's about 18 lines of text. And this isn't an idle threat. I will do a video where I will do a series of videos. I could talk about those 18 lines of text seriously for easily 10 hours. And that's one of the questions I'm now heckling myself. If someone said to you, well, what's so important about literature? I'd suggest that good literature lends itself to endless interpretation. Whereas if you gave me a Barbara Cartland novel, how long could I speak about it for? There's a very practical test. How long can you speak about a piece of text for? And is that because it's not because I'm a genius? It's because within that piece of 18 lines, there is so much sedimentation of history, theology, philosophy. A Barbara Cartland novel is a, cerebral free zone.
So, okay, that's interesting. So then, if we can rate the quality of the book by how many different ways you can interpret it, that would mean the book has a psychedelic properties in its essence, psychedelic in the sense of mind expanding, not drug-like. Well, drug-like, like a psychedelic, but it's mind expanding. It's not mind closing; it's mind opening.
Well, remember
And
the
you
idea
finding the
remember that idea the image I conveyed to you of in the previous talk, the palimpsest. For those that don't know, a palimpsest is a document. So in olden times, they'd write on animal skin or papyrus, or paper was incredibly expensive. So they'd erase what had been written and they'd write again. But there were traces of what had been written before. And that the example I think of is like archaeology. You know, when they do an archaeological dig and you can see layer after layer, the soil sediment.
Yes.
And there will be artifacts from different eras at different levels of the soil. That's what good literature's like. And it's what absolutely, if anything in this world makes me mad at the moment, it's this younger generation cancelling of history. We will not discuss something because it's wrong. And it's like, well, they had different values, they had a different ethical worldview. But we will judge people by today's standards, and we will refuse to engage with anyone who's tainted by the past. Strikes me as one of the most profoundly stupid attitudes to life I've ever encountered. And it's the mainstream. It's bizarre. The cancel culture ever got so far.
What's a Luddite? What does a Luddite actually
It was
mean?
Thomas Ludd. It was the people who used to smash up the machinery and the cotton looms in the Industrial Revolution. As the Industrial Revolution was taking over, I think Thomas Ludd was
Okay.
the organizer. They'd smashed the looms because it was putting people out of work.
So the younger generation who are very, very motivated by social justice movements and identity politics and social justice ideology could be said to be neo-Luddites in that regard.
Well, that's the other thing. It's that the identity. It's like what I was saying about overusing the word literally. Words get overused when they've lost their original substance. So in the Soviet Union, pravda. I think in Russian there are 5 different words for truth, but one of them is pravda, and that was the name of the official newspaper of the Soviet Union. But you get the irony that the least truthful publication in human history under Stalin was called The Truth. And you see this pattern in culture all the time. So when people obsess about identity, it's a pretty good chance that they have no identity. They're desperately scrabbling to express their lack of identity. So they latch onto this word.
Okay, okay, let's hold on to that for a second, because you were mentioning before how literature builds interiority, and that's not yours, that's Harold Bloom's concept, if I recall. Yeah. So if people aren't reading, and we're all reading less, then we lack interiority. Is this why people are complaining about the rise of the NPC, the non-playable character, or you meet people and they just seem to be soulless, they seem to not have any interiority going on. Is that? I wonder if there's
Well,
a correlation with that.
yeah, I'm becoming, forgive me, because, if you read a lot about a particular topic, which I have recently have you heard of the otaku in Japan and the hikikomori, the shut-ins?
Oh yeah,
And the
the
otaku are
shut-ins.
the
Yeah.
people, they're not shut-ins necessarily, but the otaku are the people who are borderline obsessed, but massive fans of anime and manga
Right.
to an extreme degree. And I'm fascinated by, so I'm doing, my next talk's called something like the Anomy of anime. See what I did there?
Mm.
Anomy being this listless restlessness, this lack of purpose, the breakdown of social values. Well, in Japan, for various reasons, it's particularly extreme. And that's interesting because I'd argue shut-ins are more common in places like Korea and Japan, not necessarily because those societies are more dysfunctional or repressive. What they found is in places like the UK or America, our dispossessed, lost young people tend to be much more likely to end up on the streets. Whereas Japan is quite affluent and family means so much more. So people will actually cover for people who decide to become shut-ins. They will provide for them materially in ways perhaps that doesn't happen in the UK and America. But
Mm.
the fact that social wide, you could lose interest in society and the world around you to such an extent. When I was talking about literature as interiority, the flip side of that is the hikikomori, which is a malign form of interiority that has no outlet. It's this idea of talking to chat GPT. It's GPT, sorry. It's this endless self-referential loop. Whereas if you read good literature, you may be alone in a room, a dark room, but you're not festering in your own juices. Your mind is going elsewhere. It's back to my point about you change as a person. Whereas the hikikomori don't change. They're in an arrested form of adolescence. And that's an interesting aspect. One of the things that you and I have briefly spoken about in the past is we seem to be in a society in the West at the moment that has many features of adolescence, but amongst adults. And this retarded adolescence, this lengthening of adolescence into people's mid-30s, maybe nowadays. The average age of a hikikomori in Japan is now about 32. And they're not actually adolescent chronologically, but mentally, I'd argue they are adolescent. And as a society, this idea that words, you've seen this in the UK, people are being prosecuted for tweets. 30 words are now criminal offences. That strikes me as an adolescent attitude to life. I learnt on the playground, sticks and stones will break my bones, words will never hurt me. As a society, we are more childish than that. It's bewildering.
I have so much to say. The first, I took a note. So the first thing, and this will be interesting for you, I think, is so I was doing an interview in Dubai three nights ago with a lady who does this Emirati-based mental health campaign called Therapy is Brown, and there's no white people allowed in it. And I said that's very racist, and she laughed because they don't care about racism in the Arabian Peninsula. They're like, that's for brown people. We're brown. Fuck you. Okay, fair enough. Based. And I we were talking, and she said, "What do you think is the difference in a traumatic family unit between when somebody becomes a codependent and somebody becomes a narcissist?" And I gave her my dogma, whatever it is. It's to do with spoiling, effectively. And she said, "Well, the research indicates that if there is one compassionate witness, the child who doesn't choose narcissism but chooses codependency will go the codependent route." And I was looking at her and I was like, I didn't have a compassionate witness. And then I thought I had the books of Narnia. I had books on magic. I had Stephen King. I was reading Sufi tales and Zen tales, and I didn't have a person but I did have books, and I molded those books and those authors and those characters into a compassionate witness. And she said it's very important around the age of 8, 9, 10. Well, at 8, 9, 10, I don't know what my reading age was, but it was like, wow, he's a clever boy. Like, yeah, he reads much older than his age. And it wasn't, it was partly driven by desperation. I just wanted to be out of the environment I was in. I wanted to be in other worlds. I wanted to be away. But that compassionate witness that literature could represent might, I just thought it'd be interesting for you to know. I don't know if she's correct or not. I've not looked at the literature on it, but she said that compassionate witness can be the difference between becoming quite nasty and becoming too nice. But obviously, one path is better than the other.
Well, could I build upon that? Because there's again something I've been reading recently. He was a weird, because he was a historian stroke philosopher. He was a weird blend, but there was a British philosopher called Michael Oakeshott, and he had this idea. He was a massive defender of tradition, not through any arch, old-fashioned, dusty, conservative way, but he envisaged, or he saw, tradition as a form of conversation with the past. So this is your ballywick, this is your area of expertise. If therapy ultimately is a form of conversation, it goes to your point about a compassionate witness, yeah? So if you're in therapy, you're having a conversation with a therapist, and around the model of a constructive conversation, you build healing processes. Am I right so far?
Yeah.
Well, if tradition, a helpful way of thinking about tradition is it's a conversation with people from the past, wise people from the past. And you reading all those books when you were going through traumatic experiences, it sounds cliched, but it's like the ghosts of the past. You have access to them. Nowadays, everyone is so ideologically certain of their own position, and they've cancelled history. You can't go back, or you shouldn't go back. Why would you read Shakespeare? Patriarchal, phallocentric, white, stale male, pale, blah, blah, blah. And it's, unfortunately, he was also borderline the inventor of human modern Western psychology. There hasn't been a dramatist of his level ever, and there won't be again. And not to be able to have access to Shakespeare as a compassionate witness is horrifying to me, but that's the reality we're in now.
Yes.
And this is my experience at university. The most intelligent conversations I had about Shakespeare with students, first of all, I should observe those conversations were rare because I wasn't teaching in an English department. So the response I would get is, why are you mentioning Shakespeare? Will it be on the test? And what's this got to do with communication studies? And when I ever did have an interesting conversation about Shakespeare, it tended to be Scandinavian students whose English was better than most of the English students. And they'd been brought up fully aware and immersed in Shakespeare. And for whatever reason, you don't want to turn this into a political diatribe, but for whatever reason, English students are some of the last people you should speak to talk to about Shakespeare. How sad is that?
It's almost like we're like the spoiled kids who inherit a kingdom and inherit wealth, and then we just become decadent slobs and we don't care about it. And when I'm out of the UK, which I am more often than not now and have to be, you speak to Arabs, you speak to Pakistanis, you speak to somebody from Iraq, and they'll say, "What's happening to your country? What's happening?" And they have obviously it's a fantasy and it's based on books and films, but fantasies are important. They're powerful. What happened to your great nation? What happened to Great Britain? What happened to royalty and to your history, to your tradition? What are you doing? What's happening there? And I'm like, I don't really know. All I can do is just opt out of participating. I'm powerless. I'm interested to hear what you have to say, but and yeah, they would associate the greatness of British history. They'll usually mention Shakespeare. They'll usually bring Shakespeare up. Everybody knows who Shakespeare is, and everybody knows about the empire. So you're talking about people who fought against the empire, and they're sort of looking back whimsically going, oh, that's a shame. You're losing it, or you've lost it. It's gone. Everything's
Yeah.
gone. All of your traditions have gone.
And it's just interesting because it almost sounds, I'm trying to have not a dissociative out-of-body experience, but I'm trying to look at what I'm saying as somebody else. And it almost sounds deludedly quaint, almost pathologically nostalgic, to find it upsetting that Shakespeare isn't dying out, but in the UK education system, it's barren times. And why that should matter. Like I say, it seems almost quaint, and yet, if not Shakespeare, then what? It just strikes me as a barometer. It's not a bad barometer of how healthy an education system can be. And I remember, excited of the old Father Time thing, but when I did my A level in English, you had to memorize chunks, and now memorization is phallocentric fascist behavior. But you had to memorize chunks. And when I was writing my exam papers, the punctuation had to be correct. And I'm not even sure whether my teachers taught me this and they were pulling my leg. It may be that the examiners thought, Christ, even the punctuation's correct. Whereas the vast majority of students then didn't. But to have the quotations perfectly correct, line by line, they had to be as the verse was written. The punctuation was correct. That level of attention to detail. And now they have things called open book. So you'll have the play in front of you. Well, you can have the play in front of you to answer the questions.
Because, why don't they just do the fucking exams for them, the lazy little twats?
Well, but the idea that it's back to your... And this is where we've had conversations about, because I am borderline inertial, never go to a gym, you know, if I have one more biscuit, I risk having a heart attack. But it's nothing in our culture. Everyone is comfortable with the idea if you go to a gym, you have to sweat to get some benefit. But our whole culture is biased against the idea that learning, whilst of course it should be fun, but to learn to any profound level, you have to put the work in. And no one's prepared to do it, or no one's prepared to even put forward that argument anymore. Because it's alienating, it's non-inclusive, it's non-representational.
Okay, what's the fix for that? Do we just have to go back to sort of a more of a Schopenhauer Nietzschean view and say, look, nature is competition, it's not equal. The notion of equality is contrary to the natural world. This is a perversion of the natural order. Compete, let hierarchies form, and let the best man and the best woman dominate the hierarchy. Why are we so scared of that, and why can't we bring that back?
Yeah, except I'd be careful about, because you know me quite well by now. I'm actually not. At one level, I'm a card-carrying, rabid elitist. But on the other hand, I've devoted my life trying to make these things accessible as possible. But there's a difference between making things accessible and destroying what you're supposed to be providing. So if I turned up at your gym in a mobility scooter eating a donut, I would not be taken seriously. You have to get out the mobility scooter and make some effort. Meet me, you know, I have to meet you outside the mobility scooter if I ever want to get fit. By the way, this is sarcasm. I am not in a mobility scooter, people. But I think the metaphor's a valid one. If people are prepared to get out of their intellectual mobility scooter, I am one of the most patient people on earth. But I'm not going to watch them in a mobility scooter eating a donut and saying, yes, that's okay. That's just as good as reading Shakespeare. It isn't.
But not everybody has the genetic proclivity to go to the gym. Not everybody has the genetic proclivity to be a plumber. Like, neither of us would make particularly good handymen. Isn't there scope to say
sorry
it's accessible?
Richard. Sorry to interrupt you, but there's one slight contradiction on that. I am probably worse than you and the world's worst handyman. I once my coffee grinder went on the blink, and without even thinking, I had it disassembled and fixed in 25 minutes. And my wife looked on, agog, completely shocked. She'd never seen me use a screwdriver. But because my coffee was threatened.
It's called motivation.
Yeah.
It's called motivation.
Which brings us potentially full circle. The answer to the question is, how do you address this problem, is to find ways to give people the motivation to want to read. And I'd suggest if you're an
I just wanted to address that point about access. I think it's a Zizek point. I think it's him, where he warns of a permission becoming an injunction. And I think that is a natural human progression. You can do this becomes quite quickly, you must do this. You have the freedom to do this, so you must do it. I would say, I'm sure in the education system, there's a space to deconstruct it, reconstruct it, and say, look, not every child is going to do everything. Not every human, not every adult does everything. You can, here's the access to the books. But if you would rather play football or climb trees, do you know what I'm saying? Like you can let people express what's inside of them.
Yeah, but then it goes on to my next point, which was about why would they be motivated to read books when they can play football? But if you find yourself in an adolescent mindset, demotivated, lonely, mental health issues, exercise will help. But also, guess what? Reading a challenging book will take you out of yourself. It is a form of therapy. That might be at least one reason to read more. Or if you're, for example, some of the things you talk about, if you find yourself in an abusive relationship, I could recommend a pile of books that would explain to you one of the things that, forgive my ignorance, it's not my area, but one of the things I get the sense is that some victims of abusive people struggle to understand how that person could be doing it to them. Well, my God, you can read a few novels. I could explain to you how a psychopath thinks. That doesn't involve looking in the DSM-5, but actually explains in accessible human terms why this evil bastard is ruining your life.
Let me absorb that, because that's pretty important, actually. Let me tell you something. Dr. Paul Taylor. Many years ago, I came up with a healing modality, and it was called emotional literacy. And it worked extremely well for a fairly small proportion of people, like 20% to 25% of people I gave it to. And in my zeal and my I gave up recommending it about 4 or 5 years ago, definitely pre-pandemic. And in my zeal and my naivety, I didn't know that people had they'd never asked themselves how they felt about anything. And it was like your mobility scooter eating a yum nut. You show up at the gym and I say, right, warm up on the assault bikes, give me 20 burpees and then do 10 pull-ups and then we'll get on with it. You'd be like, what? I don't even know the words you're saying. And I found, I'm now wondering if the emotional literacy exercise, which was an exercise literally in becoming more literate. So instead of saying, I'm fucked off, I'm fucking angry, you would go and define, is it resentment? Is it sadness masquerading as anger? Is it all of that? You delve into, but that delving into is a world building. It's actually world building. I now see in this conversational context, it's the development of an interiority. And for some people, it was horrifying, especially when they saw me so enthusiastic about it. And then they could see other people were getting great gains from it. And they couldn't even put the pen to a piece of paper and write down. They're like, I'm pissed off, I'm upset. And I'd say, but in what way? Like, so here, I'm fucking angry. And then I'd be like, okay, here's 3 circles. Break down what the other adjectives for the anger are. Couldn't do it. And it was alienating people, and it was freaking them out. So I was like, okay, I have to drop it. But I'm wondering now if that's a question of literacy itself.
Yeah, and then we get into chicken and eggs, and I think I've said to you before, Marshall McLuhan once said that a chicken is an egg's way for creating more eggs. The causality of these things is incredibly interwoven. And to what extent has it always been thus? I think it's worse. I think, there is a tendency to think things are always better, back in the old days, but measurably, even illiterate people went to churches where the images on the church walls related to the stories they were being told by the priest. And the position of the church in the town was the most important spot. The spire reaching to heaven. All of these things, there's an organic interrelationship of all these symbols that provided meaning and context. So even the thick as mince peasant had an idea of symbolism, had an idea of music. Whereas nowadays, that's gone. The symbolism, there's a profound difference between signs and symbols. And we live in a society absolutely saturated with signs, but not symbols. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we face.
Just build out the difference between signs and symbols, could you, please?
Well, it goes back to the point I made about how long can you talk about something. It might be one way of thinking about it. So if I showed you the golden M of McDonald's and said, Richard, you're quite an articulate, verbose person. Talk to me about the golden M. I think you'd struggle for more than 10 to go beyond 10 minutes.
Yes.
Right. I show you
2 minutes.
I show you a sign of a crucifix. You could go on for days. Why?
I could kill people with boredom.
Yeah.
They would rather be crucified than fucking listen to me go on about the crucifix.
But what could be a simpler? Visually, the crucifix is actually simpler than the golden M.
Right. Yes.
I'd suggest.
So,
it's not even a letter.
So one is rich with latent meaning and the other one is bereft.
Yeah. One of the reasons is I'm not being judgmental. Think of the whole...
Why not? Fucking be judgmental.
The whole concept of McDonald's is, I think it's called the ring binder philosophy. The process to make a burger should be reducible to a page of A4 that goes in a ring binder. The whole idea is wherever you go in the world with certain things, so for example, trying to get a beef burger in India may not be easy. But apart from things like that, wherever you are in the world, it should be as standardized as possible. So that whole process is devoted to getting rid of nuance, getting rid of complexity, getting rid of subtlety, whereas a symbol is based upon the exact opposite philosophy. A symbol is based upon building meaning over generation after generation after generation.
I'm glad you've said that because something's just clunked into place for me personally. So I have been online, running an online business since 2004, and I was taught it was Americans are very, very good with sales and marketing. So I learned their methodology. And the thing about selling information products is literally the ring binder. So the original information products would be delivered to your door physically, and it would be like 3 DVDs and a ring binder. And you could be spending an awful lot of money on that based on the value of the information that was inside that. And it's very reductive. And I only realized in the last 4 months that I've been doing that for 20 years. And I'm constantly got this superego injunction that says, nobody has the concentration. Nobody has the attention span. They want it quick. They want it fast. They want it fast. I'll keep the story brief. So at the beginning of this year, in December, I made a course called the Fast Track course, and I released it, and I didn't feel good, so I pulled it back. I think 100 people bought it, and I pulled it back. And then I went back to the drawing board, and I said, okay, what do you want to do? And I was like, I want not the fastest way to help people overcome narcissistic abuse. I'm going to do the biggest fucking course I want to, and I'm going to cover everything. And if it's 25 hours long at the end of me making this thing, let it be. And if people don't want to listen to it and they haven't got the patience, I say go to the next guy. But I feel better because it's not finished yet. It's 80% done, and it's no stone left unturned. And I just came to the conclusion: fuck it. If you want it fast, good luck, because you won't get better. You won't get the results. If you want the results, you must understand all of this. All of it? Yes, all of it. All of it. Otherwise, you'll keep backsliding. Your therapy will go backwards. So I'm glad you've said that, because it reaffirms for me that it was the right choice.
Yeah, and I had personal experience. My example to back yours up would be I used to do quite a bit of Radio 3 and Radio 4 in the UK, which, as my late father used to say, I have a face for radio. And what I found was it was this intellectual program, supposedly, but I was never allowed to talk in an intellectual fashion. There was this straitjacket. Apart from anything else, the format. If they had 10 minutes of radio time, for example, there might be 3 guests, and per theme, you're allowed 5 minutes or 3 minutes. And if you actually work out how many words you got to say, and it's one of the few things that makes me optimistic, is the whole YouTube environment at least allows things to be discussed at length. At least it gives us that, rather than this cookie cutter that the media works to, where they'll say things like, and now we're going to, in a news program, now we're going to go to the Middle East, and they'll describe the complexity of what's going on in 3 minutes and show a load of repetitive images. And we wonder why people have no ability to comprehend what's going on in the world.
I think that's part of the same collective content producer superego injunction that runs, that says no one's going to listen, no one's got the attention span, everything needs to be fun and funny and fast. Do you know how fucking hard it is to do psychoanalytic theory fun and funny and fast? It's a fucking nightmare. And I just said, no, I'm not. This time, I'm not. I'm going to deny the superego injunction. I'm just going to. This is how it's done. And God, in human history, when people were actually developing a skill because we just had time, the idea, I mean, in martial arts or whatever, that you would train, on and off 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day, it was completely normal. It was a completely normal thing. But you know what the effect of that was? They were very, very good. And trying to get to the levels of people in history at that level is bloody hard if everything is broken up all the time and you're constantly being pushed into different silos and your consciousness is being shoved in. You'll never learn to play the piano. You'll never learn to do a beautiful crescent kick. You'll never, do you know what I'm saying? It's almost like an anti-work ethic that the culture's developed, or an what's the word I'm looking for? Not work, but the discipline to let something build. I don't know what the word is.
Forgive me, because I've used this example with you before, but I think it's an important one. The idea of reading Proust for most people is risible. They're never going to read In Search of Lost Time. And we've had this discussion, and I would say if you read a couple of hours or 1 hour every single night, you could read, depending on your reading speed, it might take you 2 months to read the whole thing. I appreciate 2 months isn't nothing, but 2 months is not a decade. 2 months of sustained attention and effort shouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility. But do you get my sense of how, if you said to someone, "Are you going to read In Search of Lost Time?" it would seem just ridiculously impossible.
No, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to say to people, "Go read the Blood of Karamazov," because I know the response I'm going to get is going to be like, "Fuck off, mate! I'm not reading, lengthy Russian literature." And I'm like, "Well, okay then, stay where you are and waste your life scrolling TikTok or watching fucking Love Island or something, and then whinge that nothing makes sense." your thing about understanding the point of view of the psychopath and understanding the point of view of the narcissist is really, really important. And you're right, there are books that do it. And maybe again, it's a lack of literacy, because I'll suggest this to people. I'll be like, build a world. You become the psychopathic narcissist. You enter into that character. You go into that world. How do you look at people in that world? And some people are absolutely morally outraged that I would suggest that they do that. And I'm like, you can do that in your mind. It's a sandbox. You're not hurting anyone. I liked reading Pillars of Fire. I like reading about the ancient Spartans. That was child abuse. It was physical and sexual child abuse. It's wrong. Yeah, it's wrong, but it still fucking happened. And it still produced a result that we as human beings should be interested in and be able to study without feeling enormous. I don't know, is it a microaggression or whatever secondhand exploitation we're engaging in, or whatever reason there is to not want to understand an amazing piece of history, an amazing piece of human history.
So I just got distracted. Someone in the comments are saying this is a question of taste. There are good books and bad books, and there are good films and bad films. Taste is an inescapable. There are judgment calls. But I think what the person's ignoring is the point I made earlier about there is complexity and there is lack of complexity. If you want to try and take it away from subjective taste judgments, and go, if you don't believe me, do the practical test. Try and talk about the golden M for 10 minutes and then try not talking about the crucifix for 15 days, even if it's only to say how much you dislike it and everything it stands for. But this is, I've come across this before, this idea that, well, you just think that's a good book because you're a pompous git or whatever. Sometimes it's not even a question of me thinking it's good. It's to say something's interesting is not the same as saying it's good, inverted commas, because good is an incredibly vague term.
That's an infantile defense. I've heard people say that about Nietzsche, or they'll say something passive aggressive like, you pretend you understand Nietzsche because most people don't, and that means that you're deep. And I'm like, it's not a flex. It's not fun to read. It's not. But there are ways, like with Zizek, I've read Zizek, that it gives me a capacity to think about things in ways that I otherwise wouldn't, because from the psychological perspective, I've introjected Zizek, I've introjected Nietzsche, or my version of them, my faulty, wrong version of them, and they can talk to me. What's the Zizekian view of this? What's the weird, contrarian, what if the opposite were true view? And then there's the Nietzsche thing, get past all the bullshit. What's the real thing that's really going on behind all of the pretense? That's useful. I think that just makes you a stronger thinker.
Sorry to interrupt, but I was going to forget the point. I wanted to build upon what you've just said. This might be amusing to you. Randomly scrolling YouTube videos, I saw this weird YouTube video about, I think it was called Monkey Kung Fu. And it was a weird form of the preparing. Yeah, the techniques looked weird until you saw them in action. But this guy was conditioning his hands basically by punching boulders repeatedly. And what I was going to say was, whether it worked or not, what I took from observing what he did was, there are all these strands of Kung Fu, or schools of Kung Fu, or schools of martial art. They all have a structure and a perspective and a philosophy. And tell me if I've got this wrong, in order to get the maximum benefit from that particular school of thought, you follow it to the end. And even if, this is what I'd say to people when they don't like a certain writer, even if you get to the end and you still don't like that writer, if you understand why you don't like them, you've learned an awful lot. So if you articulate, to get back to your idea about the inability to articulate, the number of people who say Foucault was rubbish. So what Foucault book are you disagreeing with? Well, I haven't read any. Well, hypothetically, you got off your arse and you read some Foucault. What do you think you disagree with? And if they began to articulate why they disagreed, the beauty of Foucault's work is you'd have to do so much work to intelligently and coherently disagree with him that guess what? It's been worth reading him. Like Schopenhauer, you might find him incredibly depressing or overtly pessimistic or whatever, but it's impossible to read Schopenhauer without learning something, even if you've learned that you can't stand him. But then, if you're an honest reader, you have to ask yourself, why did this create such a reaction? So what I'm saying is, I think it's very, very difficult to read anything worthwhile that negatively or positively doesn't create a reaction that's worth dwelling upon. So it's not a question of just taste. I could read Barbara Cartland, and it's not even so much I wouldn't like it. It would have zero effect on me, for good or bad, because it would just be blah, blah, blah. There's nothing to engage with. Or am I being unfair to the late departed great Barbara?
I've not tried any of her books. It never really appealed to me. I don't even really know. Is it all about love and a little bit of sex, a little bit of hanky panky?
But one of the reasons why I'd suggest most normal, well-adjusted people have never read Barbara Cartland, and apologies to anyone in the chats who has. But anyone who doesn't, one of the reasons is she wasn't an author. She was a machine operator, and the widgets she produced were books. She had the 3-ring binder page of A4 formula for writing a novel. And people bought her books not because they wanted something different. They wanted the same novel every single time. That's the McDonald's ethos. The last thing you want when you go into McDonald's is to get a burger that's different. Yeah, they play around with the menu, but how different really is it? People want predictability. People want conformity. And that's not about taste. That's about predictability, knowing what you're going to get before you even get to taste it.
You said before you weren't sure if things were better when you were younger. And what I would say is I feel privileged in that I was raised in an environment that definitely made me stronger than I would be if I were raised in the environment today, the environment that kids are raised in today. There's no doubt. I was just under more pressure. I was expected to do more. I was expected to perform. Some of it was probably a bit cruel and a bit nasty, but the end result is I feel that privilege. I look at like younger people in my family and I know the culture that they're in their education system and socially. And I'm like, everything around you is just telling you that you're incapable. Everything around you is telling you you're weak. Every adult is looking at you and going, oh, bless, you don't have to if you don't want to. That just didn't exist for me. It was like, fucking do it. And if you don't like it, deal with it. That's not always a good thing, but it makes you stronger.
Do you know what this reminds me of? Very specifically, Ian McGilchrist's work. He mentions in one very obscure bit, it's a random page I was reading, but you know these ecodomes where they have these, huge, where they have basically tropical plants and stuff, but they're just, I think it was the Geodome or something, wasn't there, in Cornwall?
Oh yeah,
there are these massive structures where they grow plants. So it's almost like a mini jungle in a completely anachronistic site. So I think they used geothermal heating from somewhere off Cornwall, and they had this big geodome. But anyway, one of the things they found was trees. They struggled to get trees to grow. Any idea why?
Go on.
Because it's to your point. There's no wind in a geodome.
Yeah. There's no negative feedback. There's no negative pressure to push
and
them
apparently there's a substance in a tree trunk that is created when the tree encounters resistance. So I believe palm trees lack this substance. So what happens with palm trees is they grow to immense height and eventually fall over because there's no inherent strength to the trunk. Whereas strength in the trunk of a tree is a direct consequence of having to resist the wind. And what you're describing, I've witnessed it in close adolescence. I'm allergic to adolescents, but the adolescents I've observed from a safe distance have grown up in exactly what you're saying. They've been indulged to the nth degree, But the most indulged people I've ever seen, and this is amongst my relations when I was growing up, the what I thought, sometimes you think, oh, I wish I had different parents. The people I knew who had the best, most indulgent parents actually didn't do a lot in life. Because they were not dysfunctional, would be an unkind way to describe it, but they didn't have any inner resources. They didn't have any drive. If they failed their exams, it was, oh, try again and you'll do better next time. Or if you don't, it's okay. My parents, like, you know, you come back with less than an A, you're not getting pocket money for 3 months. And people may say that's cruel. It didn't affect me. So it's all good.
I'm fine, you twats. No, I know what you mean. I have young friends from the gym. I say young, they're in their 30s, and all of them, young men, they all live at home with their parents. And you talk to them about it, and they're like, well, the economy's bad and rent is high and things are different in our generation and blah, blah. And I'm like, it's also nice for you. And parenting's changed. Parents want their kids to stay home. My parents created an environment where I was like, I cannot fucking wait to get out of here. Give me my driving license. Let me get a job. Let me get a credit card, and I'm leaving. And it's not, look, we can either have the measuring stick be good or bad, but if the measuring stick is strong or not strong, resourceful or not resourceful, there was a way of doing things that made you resourceful. I don't think that abuse is necessary. I don't think you need a chaotic environment to grow up. But how about encouraging kids to leave home and just say to them, like, you know, by the time you're 18, unless you really should go somewhere and start living and either go to university or...
Can I build on your previous point about the Spartans? Because I'll grudgingly admit leaving young infants on hillsides is slightly excessive. I'll grudgingly give you that one.
I think we'll both go there, especially if it's just because they're a bit ugly or malformed. Even I think just leaving as the elements is a bit cruel.
I'm saying it because I'm conscious of your audience, so let's pretend I think it's a terrible thing.
Oh, this is the philosophy channel. You can say what you want here. If it was on the other channel, I'd be like, whoa, shit.
But just think from a purely practical point of view, without the Spartans, the Battle of Thermopylae and all of that, we wouldn't have a Western culture that we have. So the Athenian culture that everyone absolutely idolizes and everything that came after that, all our idealized notions of democracy, justice, all these things were only made possible because of a tiny little tribe of psychotic Spartans. You would not want to have been brought up in that culture, or maybe you would, I don't know, but they were the thin cocoa buttered line, if you believe the film The 300, that kept us, that basically saved the West.
Yes. I believe the 300 in essence. I've lived in Greece though, and I don't think they would have all looked like Calvin Klein models. I think there would have been squat, burly, hairy little men who were very aggressive. But yes, I do think so, and I think there's a broader point about maybe it's a question of civilization. As we become more civilized, you value hardship, strength, confrontation less because it's counter the notion of civilization, and so there's a temptation probably to try and kick it all out. We don't want any conflict. We don't want any aggression. We don't want any of that traditional toxic, what is called toxic masculinity. There's no need for it now. And then maybe that goes too far. And I think we can probably present a pretty watertight case that that's what's happened. You don't have to do anything hard.
The phrase I've just come across recently from Michael Oakeshott, he has this wonderful phrase, he calls it barbaric affluence.
Oh, that's great. That's really
It's a beautiful phrase, isn't it?
It's great.
And he just makes the point. It's another way of saying affluenza, but he was ahead of his time. He was writing about this before the word affluenza ever hit the English language. Affluence creates barbarism of a different sort. And I think that we're living in affluent, barbaric times where illiteracy rules.
Yes. The probably I don't think at this point there's going to be any kind of a top-down solution to it. I don't think you can impose, not in the UK. You can't really do anything about it. I think what I suspect is you need some kind of horrifying, perfectly normal human experience, but it would be horrifying to us as civilized people. And then you can have a reset, and then you can say, okay, should we have a little talk about what's important again? Well, you wouldn't even need to talk about it, because if things were hard enough and horrifying enough, we would spontaneously go, oh yes, we need hardship, we need discipline. Why? Because we're at war, or there's been a famine, or there's been a huge disease, or something. I think that's the only way to get back.
Yeah, it's the other thing I'd often be accused of is basically being a moaning Cassandra. I remember one ex-colleague, that was one of the politest things I was called. I always thought that was quite funny because he missed the point that Cassandra was actually right.
Yeah.
despite the fact she nagged, she was actually right. And I just think the tipping point, we've gone beyond it. But I'm trying to find ways to be optimistic. So, and again, it goes back to the idea of how do you motivate people to read? The way I ended up teaching cinema at university was because students read so little. I wanted to be able to analyze a film in a way that provoked them into resenting the fact I could interpret it that way and they couldn't. So then they have to go off and read Zizek and others to provide the same level of analysis. So you're basically very politely goading them into getting off their backsides because they loved film. Likewise,
yes,
I would suggest there are rare occasions like Breaking Bad or like Mad Men. There are certain TV productions. We are in a genuine golden age of TV production. And to be able to explain to someone Breaking Bad has certain Shakespearean elements to it is potentially a way to get people to go off and read Shakespeare.
yes, and it would be to the other point. I sort of, there's so many things going through my head. I didn't really finish it before. The superego injunction, the collective one amongst content producers and entertainment producers, that nobody has any attention left and nobody wants that, is proven false time and again. So long form YouTube videos that are philosophical debates, not ours, not yet, but there are others that get millions of views. Breaking Bad did very, very well. It was quite a complex story. It wasn't a story for simpletons. The Sopranos did very, very well. And it wasn't action-packed mafia assassinations. It was a psychoanalytic character study that was actually very psychologically literate and very carefully and well written. So it proves, it disproves the idea that people just want slop. They want easily consumed slop. There'll always be people who want that, but then I think what's happened is humans have been banded together and say, all of you want slop. Well, clearly not, and that's why Hollywood's failing.
But
because they've not.
Yeah, the one slight counter argument to that would be that as long as you're watching something like Breaking Bad, you're getting dopamine hits from the New Mexico scenery, from dramatic incidents. So I'm not decrying it. Its quality is exceptional, but then there's the counter argument. Well, you're not sitting in a room concentrating on a book, and the ability to do that when you've spent your whole childhood being exposed to smartphones. I'm asking a genuine question. How long do you think most teenagers now can physically go without looking at their mobile phone? So the chances of them reading for an hour without going, just even checking their phone.
Teenagers, have you seen how 30-year-olds act? People in their 30s, they're on a fucking 25-second cycle. I'll watch them, I'll stand there and I'll be looking at them, and you're conversing with them, or I'm in the gym with them, and the hand is in the pocket. It's like this nervous tick. And I'm like, I said to my mate in the gym the other day, you waiting for an important call? No. So put your fucking phone away before I stamp on the fucking thing and concentrate on the set you're supposed to be doing, you tit. Oh, fuck, I'm sorry. I was like, fucking hell, I'll shove that thing up your ass. But it's nerves, it's conditioning, and I really think it's just broken a lot of young people's boundaries to bits, and they don't think they can cope without it. This is the thing I really neglect about the message that's been sent to the younger generation: is you're not resilient, you're not strong, you can't cope, you need help, you need all the assistance you can get. And I'm like, why are you telling them that when they're kids? What I did when I was in schools, when I worked in the education system, I treated the kids the way I wanted them to act. If I wanted them to be young adults who could take responsibility and get on with their lives, that's how I talk to them. Like, how are you going to live? I don't treat them like babies. They're not babies. But the way that you treat them, they tend to reflect it back. I think that's the other good side of literature is the author of the literature doesn't know the age and the location of the person who's ultimately going to read it. And that's why it's good to, 14-year-old, well, I was 14, 15. I was engaging with fairly difficult pieces of literature. And I think that maybe is a missing piece in this whole mental health crisis that people are going through, is they can't cope. Whereas if they had more interiority and they had more literacy, they probably would be able to cope much more easily.
And in a bizarre sort of way, I'm thinking out loud, but sometime, because I'm, pretty much an insensate organism, insentient organism, and I lack emotion. But sometimes amidst the piles of books, I might just for a second think, oh, I'm a bit overwhelmed. I can't move for bloody books. And then what I've learned to is just, for want of a better phrase, I lean into it. It's like doing backstroke in books. It's a sea, it's an ocean of books. And my response is I'll buy a few more. Because if you let it, you can be overwhelmed. I've already got many more books that I'll ever live to read. But it's diving into it and knowing you're never going to master it is part of what I find to be a cathartic relief, if that doesn't sound counterintuitive.
It doesn't. And it was one of the things that I wanted to mention because Nietzsche, who you made me read, forced me, he did. Is it the Birth of Tragedy? It's not this one. He talks about a Greek cheerfulness. Here it is, Greek cheerfulness. And it seems to be, you know far more about the ancient Greeks and Greek philosophy than I do. There does seem to be this resilience and a cheerful attitude to life, even knowing that life is going to be hard and knowing that it's going to be tragic. Is that something that you took from Greek literature?
Yeah, so an immediate example would be Euripides, Bacchae. And to cut a long story short, but basically it's all about the Dionysian, which relates it to Nietzsche. But the king he's a bit of a voyeur. He wants to see the maenads, the Dionysian followers, the women. He wants to see them in states of undress, being in an orgiastic frenzy. So he hides up a tree.
What a terrible man. What an awful man.
First of all, he's told, first of all, that he's tricked into putting basically on a dress in case he's found, so he fits in. But he basically hangs out of a tree. He hangs out of a tree watching. I know, hangs out of a tree watching.
It's because if they caught me, I don't want it to fit in.
He falls from the tree, and his own mother, in this Dionysian frenzy, all these maenads rip him apart, and she comes back into the village waving basically a shoulder bone. And as she comes out of the frenzy, she belatedly realizes it's his. Now, it doesn't get much darker, but in amongst that, you're laughing at the idea that they trick this guy into putting on a dress. The humor, the Greek cheerfulness, even in the moment when a mother finds out she's just ripped her own son from limb, literally. There's this cross-dressing king who fell out the tree. And that's why I struggle to be too miserable. when I read this stuff, there's a tongue-in-cheek laughter about it. And it's truly horrific to read it in a way, but it really is horrific. And what you know more about this? There's actually a Greek term, isn't there, for the Dionysian pulling apart of a victim whilst they're still alive? Is it sparagma or something? I've forgotten the name of the term.
We discussed it at Liverpool Podcast Studios once. Yeah, I can't remember.
Sorry, I should know this. It's things flitting out of my mind these days. But the level of darkness, and then Nietzsche calls it Greek cheerfulness. And this is that it's great that you brought that up, because Greek cheerfulness in a different way is what I think of Schopenhauer. Right. That's what he absolutely exemplifies. And if people have got the stomach for it, you should read. And if there are any female viewers watching, test yourself by reading Schopenhauer's essay called On Women, I think it's called, or Women. And it is the most misogynistic diatribe. One little snippet would be, says women make such good childminders because they share the same IQ. That's an opening hors d'oeuvre. Now, I'm guessing a woman could read that and be absolutely apoplectic with
Who hurt you, Schopenhauer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so over the top.
Yeah.
That I find it, and if I'm saying this, for example, you and I joke, if I saw a comedy about Scousers, I find it funny. I'm not precious like that. So I'm not trying to say if I was a woman, I would be offended. I honestly don't think I would be. It's the level, it's the scathing level of critique that he engages in, that you almost have to step outside and enjoy, inverted commas, it for what it is. And that's not what our current society allows you to do. Honest to God, I was thinking about this. If I gave a talk based upon Schopenhauer's essay on women, I'm wondering whether I could be reported for a hate crime. Because in the UK, why wouldn't I be?
You should give it a go. You do it. I promise to visit you in prison.
But that's
you do it. I'll watch.
But that's how far as a society we've sunk. This idea of pursuing thought experiments to the nth degree. Yeah, it's. I find it quite, but I just think that's an innate part of the literary mentality. Is you begin reading Schopenhauer and you're thinking, oh, he's partly serious, but he's also having a laugh, and it's holding those two thoughts in your head at the same time is something that our literal times don't allow.
Couldn't you argue that that's the basis of empathy? I'll explain that. Folks, we're going to wrap up in about 5 to 10 minutes. So if you have questions, please put them in the comments. Have it one sentence long and ending in a question mark. That would be helpful. If I read Silence of the Lambs, and part of it is the perspective of Hannibal Lecter, and I'm enjoying seeing the world through his eyes. And in I can't remember which of the books it is, it describes the childhood trauma that he experiences in, I think he's Lithuanian, that causes him to become obsessed with cannibalism. And I'm enjoying that. It's not, I'm living life through somebody else's eyes. It's not that I want to do those things. It's that it's so alien to my worldview. I find it fascinating. And there's an empathy in that. Empathy in the sense of the ability to simulate somebody else's reality. That's what literature makes you do. It makes you simulate reality. It makes you simulate potential future realities and, broadly speaking, historical representations of reality, for however accurate they are. And that continued simulation of reality and different people's perspectives, I really think that that's the thing that gives you an advantage. I think that's the thing that when this, I'll post in the comments afterwards, folks, there's a really good video I sent Dr. Paul from Instagram of a lady, she's a neuroscientist, Scottish, you said, I believe. And she's describing how literature can fill in the gap in people's mental health that Chat GPT is trying to, but shouldn't. I do think that's a beginning place of empathy and being able to see, being able to argue an argument that you don't agree with. Everybody should learn how to do that. Learn to argue from sort of perspective you don't agree with.
More than that, can I give you a specific example? I have to be careful the language you use because of the YouTube censor, but you'd know this better than I based on your background in psychology. But it's a very common phenomenon, for example, for women to have fantasies of being assaulted. Yeah. But it doesn't mean, of course, it doesn't mean they actually want it to happen in reality. But from all my readings in psychology, it's a very, very common fantasy. And I can see the parallel with literature. You do not want to have the mind or experience of a psychopath, but you do get some type of mental catharsis by putting yourself in their place. Just like a woman may fantasize about being assaulted, whilst it would be the last thing on earth she would want to happen in reality. They're two different things. But we live in a society where the ability to delve into that distinction and dwell in the fantastical as a form of mental catharsis, I think that's one of the aspects we've been talking about. Our society's become so non-nuanced and so literal-minded. Those type of psychological subtleties have been lost. And the ancient Greeks could do it. The ancient Greeks could put themselves in the mind of a Dionysian, frenzied, rip-apart people, orgiastic nutter. Whereas we've lost that ability because there are so many prohibitions now on thinking nasty thoughts. And it's the classic, you don't have to be Freudian to know that what gets repressed reappears elsewhere. So what I think I'm clumsily suggesting is, if you have no outlet for the sewer that's in everyone's mind to some extent or another, what happens to that sewer? It builds and builds and builds. And I think that's part of one explanation, at least, of some of the societal problems we've got. These mental escape valves don't exist to the extent that they used to.
True. Oh, yeah, that's probably, why people liked horror literature, why they like horror films. There's a thing that people say in the music industry. The people who sing love songs and are very cute in their branding and very nice, apparently are awful people. The people who are like Nine Inch Nails and they're on stage screaming their trauma into the void and smashing the instruments up, and they're dressed in black and they have makeup everywhere and everything's pierced and they're covered in tattoos. Apparently they're lovely. They're some of the nicest, kindest, most softly spoken people.
Yeah, you could call it the Ozzy Osbourne phenomenon.
Yes, it's all out. There's nothing left. There's nothing inside. There's nothing hidden. There's nothing inside that's hidden away. I can't see many. Have you read Fernando Pessoa? Have you read Fernando Pessoa?
It's Book of Disquiet, yeah.
Did you like it?
Yeah. There's just, I like that there is, you just got me thinking though about there are so many things I'd like to do, but for all the reasons we've been discussing, how best to do videos that make things accessible. But it's your point about doing what you want to do rather than what the algorithm tries to make you do.
Yeah, I really strongly believe that you should just tell the truth as you see it. If you want to do a 3-hour long video on whatever, just do it. There will be some weirdos out there who want this conversation, who want whatever video you're going to make. If I want to do a video exploring how Buddhism collides with Islamic mysticism and Gnosticism, I'm just gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. And if nobody wants to watch it, at least I put it out. I got it out there.
Yeah, no, but just to finish on this idea that I think I'm being self-reflexive also, that for someone who pontificates about the dangers of dopamine hits, the way social media works, the way in which someone like me can also hook, line and sinker, check your numbers, Find a thumbnail that's attractive. Find a title. All this stuff.
And this is why you're so resistant to mobile phones, because you know within a very short time, the interface is so well developed it hacks your consciousness, and the collective superego injunction is get more likes, get more followers, look at your subscribers. The whole platform and template, when you open it up, is giving you that information. Nothing's saying, oh, you said something really weird in that video, well done. You said something that nobody's ever said before, or you thought an unthinkable thought and expressed it here. Nobody's going to reward you for that. No, yeah, you're right. You're right to be fearful of the phones, careful of the phones, and careful with technology, because
Maybe you and I
within
was
just a
thinking,
few weeks of interaction, you're in.
as you were talking, then I was thinking you and I should do a video with the working title along the lines of Nietzsche, why our subscribers are so stupid, and see how well that does.
So like a Nietzschean provocative essay, why our subscribers are so stupid. And then the next video should be called Why We Are Such Clever YouTubers.
Yeah. In homage to old Friedrich.
So there is a question here. I can see it is in practical terms, what can we do to survive this? Society has become some woke, female, typical sociopathic mess where DEI prohibits men from jobs, court, destroyed marriage. Ideas, please. What's a female typical sociopathic mess when it's at home? What does that mean?
It's something Ed would say. That's
Real Men Eat Steak asked another question. Yeah. Real Men Eat Steak also asked, should we all move to Qatar like Richard? Richard hasn't moved to Qatar. Real Men Eat Steak. You just watch your colon, sir. Steak is good, but not all the time. No other questions I can see.
Yeah, the quick answer. The quick answer to that would be this notion of interiority. Try and find ways to build it. Society as it's going is the problem. So you need. This is why I'm interested in the hikikomori. That's the danger, that we all end up as dysfunctional shut-ins. You have to find a way to build interiority while simultaneously avoiding that danger. So it's easier said than done.
The more interiority you have, the greater your capacity to resist brainwashing, propaganda, and ideology at its purest.
But just to be miserable again, one of the problems with that is it's right. Interiority. What I'd also argue, though, is don't be fooled into thinking a really healthy level of interiority doesn't necessarily safeguard or guarantee happiness, because then you're in my situation where you just look on the world on a daily basis. I'm struggling to read the newspaper without having a brain aneurysm with anger. So
happiness is for cattle. Happiness is for mediocre minds.
There's a question there, reading list for teenagers. I've been meaning, I'm very sloth-like. I was supposed to be doing a reading list for people in general. But it does strike me, there's a Russian writer, Lermontov, and it's called A Hero of Our Time. That's about a disaffected officer, a cavalry officer in the Caucasus. And he's basically like your average teenager, whatever, except he's a cavalry officer. So that's quite interesting. I'd say Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground would be a good read. And then I think Blood Meridian, as long as there's parental supervision and you're happy with them to read it. You disagree?
No, to get the teenagers reading Blood Meridian, I'd have them on Clockwork Orange, Blood Meridian, fiction. I think Silence of the Lambs is a great book. The Thomas Harris Silence of the Lambs is a fantastic book. But Clockwork Orange as well.
I've just done a video also on, well, not explicitly on it, but it mentions Oblomov is a Russian novel all about basically a shut-in in the 1850s. So he's well ahead of his time. But it's a guy, as a Scouser, I really related to the idea. It's a guy who never gets out of his dressing gown. And he's on the Russian equivalent of benefits based on his Dhaka in the countryside. His estate brings him a small income, and he never leaves the house and he never gets out of his dressing gown. But it's on a serious note. That's also about psychological vulnerability, and he's basically a permanent adolescent. But I would have thought for an adolescent to read about a permanent adolescent and how it would be a good warning, I think. So Oblomov, Oblomov.
Marvelous. Mr. Sandman has given us a £5, and he says, "Is
very
there a
kind.
book?" Thank you, Mr. Sandman. Is there a book that contains a concept to change your perspective about a topic or an issue that you had to wrestle with after reading it? Thanks.
I'm not sure how good an answer this is, but immediately, cause I think I know. I think on my channel, this is RJD, and he likes science and philosophy books. So to not always give a fiction answer, Ian McGilchrist's work, The Matter with Things, changed my way of thinking because I saw a scientist, and it's a bad answer in the sense that Ian McGilchrist buttressed my arguments. So he didn't challenge me in the sense that, oh my God, I need to think differently. He allowed me to think in a better way about some of the thoughts I'd already had. And the other book along those lines is Terence Deacon, The Symbolic Species, where from a cognitive linguistic science point of view, he argues that language is basically what distinguishes us from the apes, and it's what catapulted human evolution. And our brains and language co-evolved at a disproportionately fast rate. And I found that an incredibly powerful argument because most of my arguments are arty-farty, go and read Dostoevsky. But to be able, as a neuroanthropologist, I think he's described that, to be able to actually show how the human species itself is predicated upon sophisticated language skills, I think is quite profound. And I'm so ignorant about science, it's not even funny. So for me to be able to read that much science shows it was a pretty good book.
Yeah. The only book I've read in recent time that stuck with me afterwards and maybe changed some of my perspectives would be, I read last year, Octavia Butler. It's a sci-fi fantasy written from the perspective of a Black female cult leader in an apocalyptic world. It's the parable of the sower and then the parable of something else. There's like a series, and I read that, and that made me, I don't know, it was just an unusual mindset to be in for a period of time. And she's not a particularly, the cult leader is not a particularly nice woman, but you're sort of inside of her head. It's an apocalypse. Weirdly, it takes place. Get on this, Paul. Have you read this parable of the sower? Are you familiar with Cormac McCarthy's book, The Road?
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if you probably saw the film as well, where they're like pushing a trolley up a motorway at one point. That was in her book 20 years before. So California is burning, and the refugees are pushing their belongings up a road in a trolley, and some of the people start eating them. And I was like, this Cormac McCarthy's book looks a lot like some of her ideas, and I wondered if he'd nicked a few of them. But that book I found lingered with me, and it changed a few perspectives of mine. And the other one is The Brothers Karamazov. It made me more, I think, it not religious, but it made me appreciate, in a way, it's kind of a sales pitch. So Eastern Orthodox Christianity is dying. It's 1885-ish, around the time that Nietzsche wrote, God is dead, we have killed him. What are we going to do to replace God? And obviously they're reading each other's work, Dostoevsky and
Nietzsche read Dostoevsky. I don't think Dostoevsky had ever read Nietzsche.
Oh, wasn't the other way around. Oh, okay. And it was a pretty convincing argument that we as a species, we as an animal need religion, and it made me more appreciative of that, for sure.
Could I back that one up?
Go on.
Yeah, very quickly. There's a short story called The Immortals by Jorge Luis Borges, Borges, and it's called The Immortals, and it's about basically people. It's a short story about immortality and how horrible it would be. So one of the main characters is Homer, who lives like a dirty hermit in a hole in the ground, and he's lived so long he's forgotten that he's Homer, and he wrote some of the best poetry mankind's ever written. And it really made me think of, yes, we all want to live longer, but I know hypothetically we all know we have to die. But this short story really brought home to me, we actually really do need to die at some point. The party has to end. And I was just really impressed that it really brought home to me that reality of life in a way that I'd never thought of before.
Yeah. What's the name of that book again? Because you told me to have a read of that, didn't you?
It was Jorge Luis Borges, and it's in his short stories, but the actual story itself is called The Immortals, or The Immortal. I've forgotten if it's plural or singular.
Here's a statement from Missy. I have a traumatic brain injury, Missy, and some of my recall is not good. So the Kindle that I have now isn't linked from the books I've been reading for the last 5 years, and I genuinely can't remember the books I've read. So just the other day I rebought Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I got 3 chapters in and realized I'd already read it. Then I did Stephen Baxter's book Proxima and realized that I've already read that before. So the biggest books that have influenced me would be Clockwork Orange, Silence of the Lambs, Dark Half. What's my favorite book? You just mentioned it, Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, The Road. But no, I do. I mean, if I'm left to my own devices, I'll just read sci-fi until the cows come home. So I need people like Paul to tell me to read proper books as well. But sci-fi, I probably am going through not massive amounts, but 8 or 9 books a year. John le Carré has a son. I've read all John le Carré's books. John le Carré has a son who uses a different pseudonym. I went through a spate 3 months ago where I read all of his books, and then I became friends with him on Instagram. So I do read a lot, but I do have a brain injury.
Richard, but
I need assistance to recall stuff. Go on.
But Richard, could I defend you from a different angle? People are asking you what books have changed you, what books have profoundly affected you. Most people are always going to think of 4 or 5. So you're going to keep repeating.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Because God knows how many books I've read, but I always come up with the same 4 or 5 because they're the ones that really affected me.
Yes. I even thought on the Philosophy channel, when I read a book, I should do a short video about it. It's good for audience engagement. And if I liked it, I may as well. Like Children of Time, the Adrian Tchaikovsky book's great. Proxima is great. The 3 body problem. And I meant to do multiple YouTube videos about that and never got around to it. I do always cite the same books, Missy, but I do have a little bit of a brain issue with recall on some things if it's in the mid-term memory space. Anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap, Dr. Paul? I appreciate this conversation. I've enjoyed it a lot. I don't really care if the audience did because I'm quite narcissistic like that, you see.
No, I think it's been a very, very thorough and comprehensive. For me, as always with you, it's unpaid therapy. I'm not paying you, is what I mean.
That's what it is. Yeah, well, it's therapeutic for me as well. Very, very therapeutic for me as well. Your brain injury has you courtesy chat. Oh, for fuck's sake, Missy.
She's awful on Richard. She also said thank you. I think at one point she said thank you for the word salad, but your words mean nothing. So it's like you've come on a philosophy channel and you don't like words. So good luck with that.
Yeah. I don't know what's happened with Missy, but she's obviously not happy with me for some reason. Maybe I didn't answer her Instagram DMs or something. Mate, thank you so much. We're going to do this again, folks. The series we're going to do is called Textual Healing, which is Dr. Paul's name.
Go on, say it properly.
The series we're going to do is going to be called Textual Healing. He wants me to use my chocolatey voice when I say that. It's a bit like Ed's chocolatey voice. Let's we'll I guess one of the things we'll have different themes that we cover, and I guess we'll drill down on certain books as well. And ladies and gents, thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and we look forward to speaking to you very soon. Cheers.
All the best, everyone.